and welcome to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past and talk about their impact and relevance today. I'm Tim Longo, and I'm joined as always by a man who literally makes my life a hell on earth,
Brett Duville. I was actually going to suggest to you, because you had to come up with that on the fly pretty quick tonight, that you do a man who has just spent some time in where he'll spend his afterlife.
What? I don't. Oh, hell.
I'm just saying where I'm destined.
Yeah, you're definitely going to HE double hockey sticks.
It's gonna be a hot one for me,
as far as I can tell. We're talking about Doom, of course, the final episode of the game, and we do plan to do potentially a couple bonus episodes, but we'll keep you posted on that. But yeah, we're able to knock this one out. Pretty short game. Knock this one out in three episodes, one per episode of the game. And so we just played Inferno last, and so yeah, we're here to wrap up at least the main game. I think I will set aside the time to play the fourth episode.
Of the Ultimate Doom, yeah, I may as well, because I don't think I've ever played that.
Yeah, and I wanted to play it because of one of our bonus episodes. I want to play the fourth one before we play that. So
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So what did you think about actually having the game feel a lot more like you were in hell? I mean, we talked last time about how you could sort of feel the bleed through and how it was getting a little weirder. And now you're full on in hell. And while there are occasional buildings, which seem kind of weird, actually, in retrospect, it's mostly different sorts of landscapes. In fact, you have you have basically a skybox in the first one. You touch down in a little arena with a couple enemies, and I guess if you open the door, the eye demon comes out. I forget what those are. Cacodemon.
Mm-hmm.
But it's got a really big red angry sky, which is not something you see too often in the early ones like this. So I don't know. What'd you think about how it was starting to really take on the feeling of something more hellacious?
Yeah, it was fun. The sci-fi elements sort of went away more, right? And I actually do have notes about trying to have more terrain-based geometries and textures, right? There's a lot more rock, and there's the structures were either often stone or even wood, like kind of Gothic wooden kind of doors and stuff. So it was, I think, with the three episodes combined, when you see sort of like the first one being heavy tech, the middle one being the bleed between both, and then the last one being entirely Gothic sort of hell, horror, that was pretty successful. And you do, as we talked about in pre-show, I still was I forgot and was a little confused on whether we were still on Mars, but but hell had fully bled through. But then, I didn't read that outro closely enough to see we are actually in hell in this episode. So, I mean, Mars is red and there's a lot of similar themes. So, it didn't really wasn't totally successful, but the skybox specifically was like you said, the sort of clear indication that we definitely are no longer in space, so to speak.
Yep. No longer in space, no longer in Kansas. Although that's maybe where you end up. It's hard to say.
Right. And I did, obviously, just because I just finished, reading, obviously, the final outro talking about where you end up. And it's that's kind of neat, because you would like to think that they were already thinking about Doom 2, which Doom 2 takes place on Earth. Is that correct?
Doom 2 is called Hell on Earth.
Earth, right.
Yeah. But I think the progression is basically back to hell, as I recall, but it's been a little bit since I played it again. I feel like it's got a similar kind of arc.
Maybe you find out they've invaded and you have to go to hell.
Yes, right. And so you basically make your way into the city and then to central nexus or something like that, and continue into hell from there or whatever, something along those lines. I feel like in the middle of the game you're like in the slums and whatever, and then you're kind of making yourself to weirder places, but like this one. So yeah, I thought that was mostly pretty successful. I liked that there was more sort of organic looking sprites often, just as
some trees,
trees, but also some like stalagmites, I should say. I thought it was pretty well done. And of course, you've got a lot of places where you've got the some of the bleed through that we had seen before are taking up much more space. So the walls that have faces in them and carvings of different sorts of things into the walls. I thought they did a really good job of carving little details into places that were just things on the wall. They didn't mean anything. I think they stayed away from obviously anti-Christian imagery, but it seemed like they were trying to come up with little symbologies and things like that. And they did use pentagrams, I suppose. But yeah, it's interesting. No inverted crosses, I guess, is what I'm getting at. But some symbols that sort of bore that in mind, I felt like. That were just carved into the BSP, which I thought was kind of cool.
Yeah, you could see them experimenting, and a lot of the level designers at the time were trying to figure out ways to use BSP creatively, and think outside the box, and no pun intended, and yeah, it seemed like they were kind of trying to have like sort of glyphs of some kind in the walls, sometimes carved out of. And I actually, a small note about that, though maybe I just didn't realize that it was a clue, but there was a point in Unholy Cathedral, which I did like that level overall, but that one did have some symbology like on the walls, carved into the walls and stuff.
Yes, I remember. Mm-hmm.
And obviously there's probably some of the point of that is some landmarking, but to be honest, I probably put more meaning in those than I should have. And so there was a point when I thought maybe that there was some puzzle happening, some clue where it's like I had to go, I don't even know what, but it just distracted me, so
right.
It's sort of just a small note of you got to be careful sometimes putting symbology, when you have a heavily.
Yeah. If what it's supposed to mean or something like that. Yeah. I didn't even think about that. I was just thinking about that now, whether it might've had that meaning. I took them as probably landmarks, but even at the time I didn't really. And I think that's because I don't often play with the map up. Can you even do that in this version? I can't remember if you can have the map overlaid. I know you can in Doom 2, and I don't remember if I tried that.
Overlaid. I mean, you can have it up and run around while it's up, but it's not like transparent, if that's what you mean.
No, I think and maybe only in Doom 2. I'll have to go back and check. I didn't even think about that. It used to be that you could actually play with the map on while you're in the first person view as well.
Oh, yeah.
It's drawn over the top. But
yeah.
I don't
seems like they're close to that, and they could have probably done that. They must just have a black because it's all running.
Yeah,
they just take that black screen away.
Yeah, it's weird. I feel like that was a thing. Anyway, no, but because I wasn't doing that, I didn't. I had a hard time maintaining an idea of where I was in space and matching that with the landmark, which might be why they decided to add the transparent map later, if that's what they did.
Yeah.
That it would have made more sense and made those landmarks more apparent. Like, oh, this is where I am relative to other stuff. Here's this shape, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
Now that was the level with the big central area with the 4 rooms, and all the teleporters.
Yeah,
probably maybe my second least favorite puzzle teleporter thing.
The teleporting specifically wasn't great because it was hard. It was basically trial and error, right? You didn't really have a rhyme or reason about where to go.
Well, I mean, I think you had to enter each of the 4 teleporter pads or something to open a different room, but that wasn't immediately obvious. And by the time I realized, oh, that's what I've been doing, I didn't know which ones I had entered in, right? So it was trial and error in the sense that, oh, you could figure it out. I just hadn't been paying attention to how I got there, right? So, you know what I mean? Because they're in like northeast, southeast, northwest, southwest. And I mean, you could if you noticed that you went into the northeast one first, then you could go, oh, okay, I need to go into these other 3. And there were definitely a couple that I re-entered. I was like, nope, guess I already did that one.
Yeah.
And it was hard to know because often you're coming from different directions as well. So, but after a while, I got a hang of it. The one that I really didn't like was there was a level that required all 3 keys, and there were these 4 or 5 red doors that were just little circular wrappings around a teleporter that took you into some other room where you had to basically find the switches and raise and lower a lot of floors. Huh?
Yeah, that was Limbo. It was the 7th level.
Yes, Limbo.
Episode.
Yeah, and I just by the time I got to the end of that, I was like, oh my god, I can't keep track of where I've been. And what it made me think about was, so back in the day, we mentioned in an earlier podcast that I would have taken a lot longer to play through these levels, and I think I would have had notes like, oh, okay, when I go through this one, I need to know, like, oh, I'm going to have to do this other thing first, and basically keeping track of that myself. Like, oh, this one goes to this place and this one goes to that place. And I, blasting through it a lot faster this time, I definitely didn't do that. And so for a game that's meant to be pretty propulsive, it feels weird to have things like that where it's like, I got to keep track of these 5 different places and figure out what order to do them in. Or I guess just, reload, I guess. I mean, there was enough health around, I guess, so it wasn't too bad, but it was still pretty rough.
Well, yeah, I mean, the to add insult to injury, each of those pads were surrounded by, like I think you mentioned, the
lava or
the
whatever,
blood lava or whatever that it was, So, in fact, in my case, because I was playing so sloppily and just kind of brute forcing it and not taking notes, like you said, and just kind of playing quickly, I actually did whittle my health down pretty far, and so toward the end of that level, I was to the point where, like, I think I had probably just, sort of wasted a lot of health running back and forth on the lava, used all the suits and stuff. And so I did finally get there, but I think I finished the level with like 50% health or something. And then the bad thing about that is you enter into the last level, which is, a boss level with 50% health. So that's like not a good combination for that spider boss. So yeah, it's that level pretty much alone is the reason we were starting later than we'd like.
Yeah,
so I was rushing to play, and I did get kind of stuck because I probably would have played it, in half the time if I had taken notes. To your point, so yeah, I mean, not my favorite for sure. Yeah, for Unholy Cathedral, I really kind of just, other than the teleporting stuff, I like the structure of the level. I like symmetry, and I like kind of big central areas that have a lot of, hub and spoke kind of feel to them. So that was more just like a personal thing. I liked Slough of the Despair, which apparently is another name for a swamp. And I guess it was kind of swampy now that I'm looking at the map. It's the one that looks like a hand or a gauntlet from the top-down view. So it's a little bit sort of silly in that way, but very hellish, I guess you could say. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of kind of monster closet areas. Oh, that's the one. Is that the one where you get the BFG? That cool
It's nice to get that BFG.
Yeah. I was happy I got that. I kind of happened into it. I can't find it quickly, but anyway, yeah, that one moment where there's that, maybe not infinite spawn, but there's that, they're coming out of some sort of portal, the enemies. They just keep coming.
Right, yes.
And then did you find that? Yeah, and then you can, if you run past them, you can get the BFG and then just kind of waste them all. And so that actually was the first BFG for me of the game.
That's not where I got the BFG. I got the BFG way back on level 3, I think. Is that where the Cyberdemon is at the end of a long hallway and a bunch of imps on the right side?
Cyberdemon. Which one's a Cyberdemon?
Not Cyberdemon. Baron. I'm Baron of Hell.
I never found a Baron this whole episode.
That's not true.
No,
the guys with the ram's head?
Yeah,
you
never
had
saw
to have.
one.
There was one in the final level, for crying out loud.
Not for me. No. I'm playing on the difficulty below middle. So
okay. Well,
I don't know if that changes.
That may change the enemies. I didn't realize that. That's interesting. Oh, I did not. I played on. I played on the middle level. Hurt me plenty, I guess.
Yeah, I knocked it down one just for time. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I think it does remove enemies. So they did some scripting. That's something to note because that means they did some scripting for that or what have you, however they would control that.
Yeah, just tag things to move them down a level or something like that. Oh, interesting. Yeah, so there's early on in the game in this episode when you have very little ammo, it's the second or third level. There's a Cyberdemon. That was the point at which I had basically no ammo left, and I was just knuckleheading my way through a level to try to find ammo and probably also health. I want to say it was the third.
Yeah, could it have been the third? Because I feel like in the third, not saying that it might have been difficulty, but I know I might have skipped somehow like a big portion of that level because I found, like I feel like my kills for that level were like 50% or something.
Mm-hmm.
I found
that was the one I'm thinking of. You went up. There was an area that was kind of above that was like a little mazy area that was like wood. It felt like the top of a castle, very crenellated. And then that would go down to two sides. It's a fairly symmetrical level. And in the center,
I'm looking at the map here.
I should probably look at the map too, but I don't want to go type it up.
Let me see. House of Pain is 4. No, I think it's Pandemonium. Yeah, but keep going.
Yeah. So yes, I ran in. There were a couple pinkies coming from the left. I took care of them, and then I'm like, well, I gotta find. That was almost all my ammo. I've got to go try to find some. And so I ran down. At this point, I still just had the shotgun and the handgun. Maybe were it. I might have had a chain gun, but that uses the same ammo. So I went and ran down this long hallway, the other side, and there was a Cyberdemon at the end of it. And I'm like, oh no. So I went running back all the way through all these enemies that I had left behind. And basically they all ended up starting to fight the Cyberdemon.
Oh, cool.
It was like a bunch of imps and things. So, none of them were doing a ton of damage, but he was just throwing stuff at me every so often. And it was like, oh, well, okay. They'll try to weaken him down a little bit. I had a lot of sort of moments like that. The final level of the game as well, I got both. So for me, it was a Cyberdemon. A Baron. I keep saying Cyberdemon. A Baron of Hell and a Cacodemon, both fighting the Spider Demon.
Okay, so in mine I had 2 Cacodemons.
Oh, interesting. So yes, they must drop down the Barons for that. But it was on that level where the Cyberdemon. Baron of Hell, kept the Baron of Hell. I keep doing that. I don't know why. The Baron of Hell appeared that I also found my first BFG, and I was really happy to have it because although he got whittled down, I had not a lot of ammo. I was like, oh, I can switch to the BFG and get that going. The big friendly giant. That's what that stands for, I assume.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's just it's a Rodal
reference.
Spin. Yeah. They're very literary with their references in this game. It is Pandemonium. There's a BFG on that. I was just looking it up, so that's probably
okay. Yeah. So there you go. I don't know. I guess you just didn't find it. So
Nope. Like I said, I think that one I might have skipped a section. And in general, my secret percentage is pretty low for the levels. To be honest. Pandemonium. That's a Paradise Lost. Yeah. Okay. I'm just getting lost in the wikis here, but
that would be something Sandy Peterson would know.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah. It's a good. He's got in this chapter overall. I would say. There's a lot of
Dis is another reference, the Plains of Dis, I think.
That was that did ring a bell, but I couldn't remember.
That's a level. That's a level of Inferno.
Yeah. Okay. Nope. I'm listening now. I'm looking at the names of all the songs, the score.
Okay. That I don't know. I don't know the name of those, so I will see them when I pull music tomorrow morning.
Yeah, and then the other level that really stands out for me that to be honest, wish they did more of. They did, I guess, in every episode. The last level was generally kind of open because they wanted you to fight the boss in that sort of situation.
Right.
But Mount Erebus, Erebus, yeah, is let's see, 6, and that is that was just kind of a big open level, and for the most part, and I thought that it was fun to kind of use the enemies against each other and to really, because you're moving so fast in this game, to have a big open level like that. It was just a nice, refreshing contrast to everything else that you'd played, because there's been so much hall crawling,
corridor,
and corridor sections and tight, and kind of getting turned around. And here you really can it felt, to be honest, I felt a lot more like Dark Forces, some of the Dark Forces levels, and I'm wondering
interesting,
if this was one that really inspired them, because it felt like you're in this big canyon kind of area and you're just running around. And I'd run around the outskirts and kind of lure them out, and and you can have a lot more obviously space to do circle strafing and really kind of see the projectiles coming. And so it was really fun to kind of leverage the enemy makeup, not only against each other, but just the different mechanics, right? Because the Lost Souls would charge you, but they couldn't charge all the way to you because it was so big. And so you could kind of track them, and then you saw the projectiles coming from the imps and the cacodemons, and it felt like kind of a cool showpiece for the AI and for the enemies, and it felt, obviously, because it was open, it felt a lot bigger, right, and grand,
right,
because you kind of saw all the sections of the level most of the time. So I'd love to hear like if there were any challenges to making levels like that, for how they optimize stuff like that, from a view frustum perspective, or clipping, or things like that. However they dealt with sort of that the performance management of a level like that versus the others, which you're really only seeing so many polys at one time. I'm looking at the down overhead map of that, and the geometry looks maybe simpler in that level, so that's probably how they controlled it. But I'm thinking of Gromesh Mines in Dark Forces,
right,
that was a very hellish level in and of itself, right?
Or even the Imperial City. There's that huge area at the beginning as well. And that's a good pull. There hasn't been a lot of spaces like that, although I think the 7th level, which is pretty convoluted, has a lot of sort of vistas because it's in this huge lake of, I don't know, blood lava or whatever. So there's kind of a lot of places where you can be looking a long way if you want to be. But BSP does that, right? BSP basically eliminates overdraw, so you don't have to.
Right.
You don't have to do as much clipping, and you're limited, of course, to. You're limited in what you can do with it, and sort of how everything has to meet up. And of course, in this game, like nothing's directly on top of anything else, I think, right, is a limitation. All kinds of sort of weird limits that they have, which is actually something we didn't talk about, the fact that it's basically topologically a 2D game, which is to say, even though there are elevators and teleporters and things like that, basically it's a continuous space, which is kind of neat. It's an interesting constraint to have to deal with. And when you look at the map, you can see them fighting with that, right? I mean, not necessarily in a tough way, but just in sort of like, oh, I'm a dungeon master who has one sheet of graph paper kind of way.
Yeah. Yeah, and when you look at, as we're talking about each level, and you look at the top-down maps, you can really see the design happening, and how they were sort of thinking. And these days with 3D, much more three-dimensional level design, the opposite has actually happened, where a map system is actually pretty difficult to figure out the best way to do it. Because maps are so much more three-dimensional and vertical and sort of in all directions. And so map interfaces and systems are fairly challenging, especially if it's a complex map. I think complex level. We talked as another sort of callback. It kind of makes me think of Thief again a little bit, because they chose to be abstract with their map, right? So and there was enough sort of complexity with those levels and sort of quote unquote puzzle elements where a map, like a literal map, representational map, would have actually made the game a lot different, a lot more different. So and then Dark Forces, let's see, they had a similar map to this one, but you could rotate it. Was that right? They had a little more going on with their map, I feel.
Yeah,
like.
I think that's true. I don't remember exactly. I was also
they had levels.
Ultima Underworld as well, where
the
map had to exactly match, but it was basically a gridded map, more or less. I mean, it may not have been represented that way, but I think it was in effect a gridded map, because I think that's how they dealt with the computational complexity of rendering a 3D space. It's like, oh, okay, well, at least if we know what's in each grid, we can optimize around that or whatever. Is my recollection. Now it's been a little while since we played it, but I'd have to really look at these games again from that light. But it is interesting, because of the sort of map abstraction, like part of the play in those games with a more abstract map is like figuring out what you're looking at in the world and feeling kind of unsettled and not really, feeling weaker in some ways, right, than this game, in which this is a power fantasy. So in this game you want the map to be simple, you want it to tell you maybe sometimes what you've missed, especially in some of these bigger levels where it's pretty complicated. There's a lot of backtracking, so that there's kind of a help there of, I sort of feel I didn't find the mapper on every level.
No, I didn't, for sure.
Yeah, and I don't know if there is one on every level. There probably is, but I certainly didn't find them all. And I sort of feel like that was probably added in levels that were a little bit more Baroque. So that you would be able to at least look and say, "Oh, I haven't been in this area." It's I can see that it's there, but it's gray. Especially some of these bigger levels where there might be keys all over the place, and you've got to remember where in that one place where the 5 different red doors are, and since they all have the same shape, you can look at the map and go, "Oh, right, there's this other one over here," etc.
Right.
And try to keep track in your mind which ones you've already been to. I think rotation would have hurt that. Actually, it would have made it that much harder to get your bearings if the map was rotating with you. So,
well, oftentimes, like, depends on the order of operation, of course, but the map system and the level design end up later in development end up influencing each other, right? Because you start the usability of the sort of finaling of a game, whether it be usability testing or just the QA department in general, you're kind of seeing what the map is doing to get people to understand how to finish a level. And so depending on what direction your map design is going, will actually change the way levels feel and play and how difficult they are once that tool is exposed. And then the irony is that oftentimes I would think you'd agree with this. The map system is something that isn't really done until later,
Yeah.
Like, what are we going to do about maps? I don't know. Let's think about it.
Right.
It's never there at the beginning, really, for the player at least. And so it kind of ends up sort of in reverse order influencing level design, because now there's a new tool that the player didn't have when we were playtesting the levels early in development. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's interesting. And I wonder if that allows them to feel like they can be more comfortable with making these much larger levels, which I guess
Yeah, that's what I mean. Especially if some of these chapters, which we can assume were started later in development as well, right? Because when say I'm making this up, but the first episode maybe was made before the map was ready or something, and then the last episode was made when it was, and so Sandy might have had a feeling that he could be more clever because, they're going to use the map to, to figure this out. So yeah, it's an interesting thing. And then the games that, like, feel like this is a correct statement, but I'm probably wrong. Most Zelda games don't have maps for dungeons. Is that right? Maybe I'm wrong on that, but I feel like...
I mean, most of the ones I've played have some kind of map for a dungeon, but it's a top-down only grid of how the runes connect, usually.
Maybe it's just... Right, yeah. I feel like Nintendo in general doesn't like overdo their maps other than maybe Metroid, but yeah, maybe I'm wrong on that with the Zelda example.
Well, Metroid Prime is an example of a kind of an amazing 3D map. It's all just wireframe, but it's exactly the space in terms of knowing how long distances are and things like that, but it's not complex. Really good mapping system. I remember that one well.
Mm-hmm. It distills it down pretty well. And that's a good example of a really challenging situation to show a map.
Yeah.
Hadn't anticipated talking that much about maps, but
but there we are. Yeah.
Well, especially for a first person game, they are a pretty important element of the design to not overlook. And I think, sometimes when games have sort of underestimated the, how to implement a map or how difficult it is or how important it is, the ones like Metroid Prime that really devote time and energy to it, stand out and usually are better for it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And, and one thing, of course, is with BSP, the map basically is the territory. There's, you obviously lose textural detail and things like that, but you're basically looking at exactly what the space is, which is one kind of nice side effect. And that's one of the things that makes mapping much more difficult today, is that there is no obvious, like, what is all this stuff, right? How do we even know what the important things are? Where can the player even walk? It's a big complicated problem. One
thing later in life for me in video game development life that I've tried to kind of shift toward in this map conversation, especially in some of the later games, and it depends on the audience you're going for, but one thing, once you do have the map going in development, that I try to remind people of is that it can't be a crutch as well. That for good usable level design, ideally, the tools that you have are in the flow of the map, at least for more of a broad audience game. And I think what ends up happening sometimes, and I do feel like, though the map was really good in Metroid Prime, I feel like I have some vague memory of times when I was like, they were expecting you to use it to kind of get to this next section or something like that. And it's tricky it just becomes a bit of a crutch, it's like, well, our map's really good, so we can make things harder or more difficult for the player, because we have this means for them to get extra information. And so it's just something that I try to caution level designers on, once you have a map, to make sure that it doesn't become the way, basically it kind of boils down to what percentage of time are they in the map screen.
Right.
And that shouldn't be really high.
You don't, we've said this before, you don't necessarily want your game to become a map game.
No.
Right. And, there have definitely been games that I've played where I look up and I'm seeing, like, I'm always looking at the map in the upper corner so that I know where to go next. And I'm not seeing this beautiful world that's in front of me, because they've taught me that that's the way to navigate the actual world. So, it's a real issue. But here the map is so close to the game, it's kind of funny. So it doesn't show enemies, obviously, or projectiles, so you can't.
Well, and there were times when I was playing the map game because I was lost or something, and I would just turn it on and navigate. Sometimes to my demise, because I would fall into lava or something. But I would literally just play the game that way and navigate through to get quickly to where I wanted to, to an area that hadn't been that still had fog of war on it. So. I mean, in some levels they succeeded at that, and some they they pushed me toward the map, at least for me, because I just got so turned around. But yeah, good topic.
One other thing that I noticed this time was an absence rather than a presence, and that was that this game, and I might be wrong about this, but I don't think I am. I don't think this game has blood locking. Where you're required to kill some number of enemies for some sort of progression to happen.
I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think I ever saw it, but I do feel like the game uses its enemies really cleverly to sort of suggest blood locking. The simplest example I can think of is that there was a room in here which had a cacodemon in it. And it was like a secret room. I'm like, oh, cool. I went in there and I opened the secret. The door closed behind me. And then there's another secret door in there. And I find that, and there's a cacodemon behind it. It's a simple room. It's tiny. I don't have a lot of room to move. And behind the cacodemon is a button that opens the door that I was. You remember that one? Okay. So, and I was, that I think was the moment where I was like, oh man, there hasn't been any blood locking in this game. Because it was such a clear example of, oh, you want to get to this button, you got to go through me. But not, you have to kill me. You just have to get past me to this button.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's done that in a number of places. Sometimes it's like, oh, if you want to go get the chainsaw or whatever, you'll have to go through these enemies in order to get to it. Or you can leave it. Like, you don't have to get the chainsaw. I thought that was kind of unexpected. I guess that's just a slightly later, very slightly later design approach, blood locking.
Mm-hmm. Well, it'd be interesting to know. Well, I don't know, because I feel like some of the SNES stuff, that there's some, that conceit was a bit old school as well.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, it's just a video game, so don't worry about it. Just kill these enemies and move on,
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. Yeah.
So maybe they were trying to move forward beyond that. Maybe they were just trying to make a space and have it be, feeling like a more of a fully realized place, and just enemies were coming. Of course, they did have, enemies hidden behind doors and stuff. So
right, yeah, they have monster closets. They're not trying to do anything logical, right? I mean, they're not.
No.
So it almost would make sense that they would do something abstract like that, that it would be okay for them.
It would have fit in.
Really there.
No, that's a good catch. I feel like it's such a game about speed, and it even has a par on the
right,
on the mission.
Yeah, basically a score attack on the time.
Yeah, and so it's like, well, you don't have to kill everything, and it has a percentage of kills. So like, there's a way to track how successful you were with killing. If you ignore everything, that will be a lower percentage. So if you do want 100% everything, you're opting in rather than them forcing you to.
Right.
It's like, oh, I want 100% on everything, so I have to kill everything. Or I want to get the par, or get a set a world record on speedrunning. So yeah, I don't know. It'd be interesting to know what the psychology behind that was, or if it was just accidental, or what the real reason.
Yeah, I mean, it may have been they didn't want to spend the time to track individual enemies. I mean, one of the things that happens when you have sort of emergent style of enemy play here is that, oh, you want to change how it feels, add or subtract enemies.
Yeah.
Right? Just literally place them down in the map or not. And if you have to do scripting of like, oh, well, when all, X of these enemies are killed, then you are definitely slowing yourself down, both to create it, but also to do things like balance it and things like that. So might have been part of the philosophy there. It's an interesting trade-off, and it feels like we are often very concerned, and we've talked about the reasons why, certainly in the more modern era, we have this. We're so concerned with maybe slowing the pace of play down a little bit that, this is a game that's like, you know what, let's make it really fast to make levels, and just jam those things out. And that feels like a thing that they would have learned with Wolfenstein, and certainly carried forward with Doom 2.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. A couple of small topics that I had in my notes that I wanted to call out that I don't think we hit. Moving into some other categories. One, I don't think we've talked about animation of sprites in a couple different areas, but specifically death animations for enemies, and in many cases partnered with death sounds. Or for enemies specifically, I thought needed to be mentioned, because especially the Cacodemon death animation is quite good and quite horrific and cool. And then with the what are the pinkies called? Isn't Pinky that's not their real name, right?
No, it's not their name, but that's always what I call
them. Okay, yeah. Well, yes, one thing that I don't think I mentioned last time, but it did occur to me that when they die, their body hits the ground and there's a good thud sound to it. They're also the only enemy that's invisible. And so that thud actually, or has a variant that's invisible. And that thud actually is very good tell that when the invisible one, when you're fighting an invisible one, that you've actually killed it. It has kind of a death knell sort of sound too, but that thud is what I listened for more so. So that's sort of related to just the death cycle for enemies is something to not be, underestimated as well. And I think there's some good early examples in this game of nailing some of that stuff, because it's both gratifying just from an aesthetic standpoint, but also there's really important sort of mechanical reasons to have that stuff really dialed in. And it's just, it's definitely fun to watch some of those death animations. So I wanted to mention that specifically.
Yeah, that's a good point, because one of the things that's interesting about, and they are actually just called demons.
Okay. Well, how did we mess that up?
I don't know how I messed that up. I've always called it a pinky or the pinky demon. But it originally had a different animation. They actually originally exploded, not in the in the alpha. There was a exploding pinky, and it might be that they decided to switch that in order to reinforce that important information, especially with the invisible ones. So that's that's a good pickup. Yeah,
well,
they definitely do have a good noise.
Yeah, and they have from my memory, they have one of the better thuds, when their body hits the ground. So that's a little detail that it's one of those things in sort of your subconscious when you're playing that you note, but you never really think about it because it's succeeding, Yeah. And then when I play games mostly for fun or whatever, I don't think about that stuff. But for the podcast, I try to, think a little bit more deeply if I can. And that was one. And then the other one that I don't remember how Wolfenstein dealt with this. They probably had persistent corpses for enemies. But the other thing to keep in mind is that those are really important tells for both progress, places you've been, as well as landmarks. So if you kill a Cacodemon in a certain place and you remember you killed it there, it actually becomes a landmark. And so, there was a time before this where enemy bodies would disappear. And even today, oftentimes for memory reasons and performance reasons, we have to despawn, bodies. So they can't be there forever. But if you can have them there forever, they actually accomplish, additional secondary goals that people sometimes don't realize. But again, subconsciously, you're like, oh yeah, I've been here. Oh, I remember killing that Cacodemon. Oh yeah, now I know where I am because I remember this, and this, and so another kind of just tiny detail, but but also something that people I think don't necessarily always think about.
I had noted that myself actually in that open level that you mentioned, whichever that was, Erebus, I guess. That I was wondering, what did this contribute to? Did it just contribute to the sort of oppressive feel to have all these bodies piling up around you? Does it help you feel more powerful? But yeah, making it a landmark too is a really important thing that didn't occur to me at the time, while I was playing. So yeah, I mean, I think you probably get elements of all of those things, but there's definitely oh yeah, this is where I did that thing. I know where I am now for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's there's mechanical aspects to it. There's the sort of the storytelling, like you said, like you were just saying there, the storytelling aspects of it, of oh, this is where that fight happened that was so hard, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you have a memory, especially if you reload and you're like, oh yeah, that's right, this is where I died, or this is where I got all of them, or whatever. And sometimes, especially in these modern days, and it's it's a bit of a morbid way to track sort of progress, right? Because it's a bunch of dead bodies.
Yeah.
But in a shooter, that's the bread and butter, unfortunately or fortunately, for better or for worse. And but these days, the enemy entities are so expensive. A lot of times it's the first, body persistence is the first thing to get cut or really trimmed back for performance reasons. And it does have an unintended consequence to that often.
Yeah.
Where you just don't have that history to the world as much. And once
to be clear, Tim's talking about the memory and or performance expense of these things, that it costs a lot of time to render them, right? Not the expense to build them, though that's a separate expense we sometimes talk about.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Based on how much it costs to make them, you almost wish we could leave them on screen all the time.
Totally.
So,
yeah. Well, and in some games, in some cases, they also take a simulation cost because you may choose to
they're ragdolled or whatever.
Have them be a part of the physics system, right? Which also adds to a good immersion and sort of sense of, oh, the place is actually more fully realized. But simulating, a lot of those entities around is really not usually that feasible. So, but in these old sprite days, you just pop a sprite there, and then to your point about the Pinky Alpha, if it were to explode, then it wouldn't be maybe as memorable of a corpse, or maybe it wouldn't be there at all because it exploded. So
right.
So it's like, there's a
you also run into fidelity issues there of like, well, if this thing exploded and blood went everywhere, where is it? Right. So, there might be I don't think that's a realism thing necessarily, but since many of the other enemies have a physicality, you might have missed it. So a good decision to change it, regardless of why. There's a number of reasons it could have been, but the consistency is a good one. Of knowing where you've been. Definitely some rooms that had a lot of Pinky bodies in them.
There was one moment, speaking of Pinky, that's just a bit, I just want to call it a couple moments, or I mentioned some of the levels that I liked, but that one moment where it's one of the early levels where there's just a long, straight, narrow hallway with the Pinky running at you as you come around the corner. Do you remember that?
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
It's just really narrow, and you feel very claustrophobic, and you come around a corner, and way down at the end of the hallway, there's just this one demon running at you slowly, and you're like, and you're just shooting, and then you kill him right before he gets to you. And there's nowhere else to go, kind of, you go backwards, but it's they really were taking the tools they had and making the most of them for sure, and fooling around with how all of those systems work together. So,
cool. Any other memorable moments for you that you wanna do before we go to takeaways and feedback?
Let's see. No, I think I hit kind of in a roundabout way most of them. That was about it.
Yeah, mine with the spider demon getting both the other enemies aggroed was pretty great, because I just ran around the circumference of the room, just picking up rocket after rocket after rocket. I had so many rockets at that point anyway, but I was just like, well, I might as well do this while they beat up on each other for a while. And I could actually hear, to your point, I could hear the Baron go down. And the Cacodemon go down. So it also emphasized how tough this enemy was. That just kind of randomly happened for me. I didn't try to set it up. I just was running along the edges, trying to stay away from the Cacodemon, and just like, well, maybe it'll pick those guys up and they can deal with it. And it sure did. So that was a great kind of moment. So that was a moment that really stood out to me. And having the Baron make its big kind of roaring noise that it makes when it falls.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like a revving down car or something. It's kind of a weird sound. That really stood out because you could hear it from quite a ways away. So It was good. It was very good. So,
how much did you use the chainsaw?
I did not find a chainsaw this time.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I didn't. I found
I used
one.
it a lot in the other levels, but I did not find one this time at all.
Really?
So I didn't. Yeah.
I was always too afraid to go because it's obviously good not to overanalyze and over deconstruct a design. Even though we think chainsaw, of course, chainsaws are cool. Why wouldn't it be in a Doom, a game about hell and fighting demons? But it's a really good risk reward design because you have to close in on enemies that you really don't want to reap the rewards of using it. But I just was always too scared to get close to things, so I just never used it, even though it's unlimited ammo, which is.
I used it on cacodemons. I used it on pinkies all the time. I rarely use it on things that could do projectiles, except for the cacodemon, because it does them kind of more infrequently, and it's easier to kind of get a beat on it because it's pretty wide. So it's easier to kind of get jammed in on it and do the damage, and it constantly stun locks it. And I would occasionally use it even on the lost souls, the flying heads, because if you time it right, you can just sort of, they fly in and get caught up on the chainsaw, and you just buzz through them. So,
yeah, I should have used it more than maybe.
Doom 2 really leans into putting you in situations where you're just not going to have enough ammo, and you need to use other things like invincibility and the berserk, the black health pickups with the red cross on them that make you do double damage for a period of time, but only while you're punching. There's a very memorable level in Doom 2 where you've got at least one Baron and maybe two, and you have nothing. You just and you just have to run in there, get the invincibility, find the berserk, and just start punching through them. And it's like, it's going all the way. It's dialing up the power fantasy to 11. Not only am I against, some of the toughest things in the game, I'm also punching them to death with my bare hands. So,
right.
Yeah, it kind of goes all out.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that gets a little more almost puzzly, right?
Yeah.
With which is a good progression for a franchise to get force the player into certain situations to have them use rather than just brute force. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. I don't even remember. I think they just whittle you down by having enough enemies. They basically know how much stuff you're going to have, and so it's like even if you're maxed out, you're going to run out. It's just going to happen. I don't know. Yeah. There might even be logic to that puzzle. They may spawn enemies or something. I don't think that's really a thing much in this series, but it might have been in that case. I don't remember how it really worked, but I do remember that moment of just like, okay, it's just me and my fists. Thing 1 and thing 2. I guess I'll see what we can do here. Yeah. And then have that Baron appear and make its noise and go, oh, I guess that's what we're doing. So,
yeah. Did
you see the final animation, by the way?
The final animation
with the rabbit?
No. I just once the spider demon died, it just went through to the splash screen.
You get the text.
Mm-hmm. And then it went to credits.
After, I don't know if it's after the text or after the credits, there's a rabbit scene where it says you've come back to Earth. There's a rabbit playing in the field in front of you. And then you slowly pan to the left, and there is this city being consumed by hell, and a rabbit's head on a pike.
Huh.
As you pan to the left. I guess you didn't find that.
No. You're not making this up, huh?
I'm not making this up. No, this is a real thing.
Oh, that's weird. I saw the credits come up. Maybe I skipped it or something.
Yeah, it's possible. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe because I just read,
hit enter or something like that. Yeah, you might have to just sit. I can't remember. I just sat. I was just sitting here. I'd finished. I was just kind of thinking about the game, and it came up. So
yeah, I'm playing on Switch, so I could have.
Oh, they may have taken it out. They may have taken it out of the Switch. That would not surprise me. It's a little gory.
Oh, maybe for rate
because you've got this rabbit head, on a spike.
Maybe, but in this we didn't talk about it too much, but there's a lot more graphic human bodies in this, in this last chapter. Some of them are still moving, like on pikes, but wiggling, and some crucified people, and
that's true. There is definitely some pretty gross stuff.
For the time, I mean, it definitely was over the top. So you can see where all the sort of naysayers are coming from when you look at some of this stuff.
Yeah. Well, that's a whole different conversation.
I know, we don't want to go there, but you're like, well, yeah. I mean, you're running around with pentagrams over your head, and and stuff, and so. So no, I missed the rabbit. So I'll have to go maybe watch that on YouTube or something.
Yeah, I'll put a link in the show notes. There's a song as well. It's
a special score to it?
I think so. Yeah, I don't even really remember this morning what the. There's definitely something. But yeah, there's a bunny scene. And it's sort of funny because it sort of that Doom 2 ends with a head on a spike as well, if you recall.
Doom 2?
Yep.
No, I didn't finish Doom 2 either.
Oh, okay. So Doom 2 ends with John Romero's head on a spike.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. Okay, no, I did know that. Yeah,
you knew that, right? It's in this room behind the Cyberdemon or something like that.
Yeah.
So there's a whole thing. But yeah, it's kind of like. It's almost foreshadowing. That's why the next area is called the Warrens.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, like rabbit warrens, and you didn't pick up on that. So now I understand why. Yeah, we were talking about an extra level or a secret level that is, I guess, in the Xbox version or something, called the Warrens, and that makes sense why it might be rabbits. Anyway.
Yep.
Okay. Do you want to take a quick break, and then we can come back and do takeaways and feedback?
Sounds good.
Welcome back from the break. We're here to do our takeaways since we're at the end of a series, sort of at the end of a series. Tim's laughing because we've just spent almost 4 minutes talking about movies and things like that while I was recording, and I guess he didn't notice the big red light blinking on his screen.
I was actually laughing because your clap was left
feeble.
Yeah, it's like your clapping was like
I clapped, but it was like in my lap, and then I'm like, I should probably do this a little closer to the mic.
Good clap. Anyway, yes, we digress. We're going to do takeaways for Doom, the original.
Yes, we're not quite at the end of our time with Doom and Doom related items. We think
not
we
at
have
all.
3 weeks, I think, of additional stuff. So we're going to put off reviews and feedback and spread it out into those a little bit more in the hopes of getting this episode to a trim hour and 15 minutes or so. So let's move to takeaways, and I'm going to open the floor to you first, sir.
We obviously, as usual, we hit a lot of these quite heavily throughout the episodes for the series. But the one that we kept coming back to, and that is obviously near and dear to my heart, is level design. Really, it's a bit of a broad takeaway category, but I did want to. In an era when this genre was being defined, and this game being one of the definitive ones of the genre, if not the definitive one, if you can kind of count Wolfenstein 3D as a sort of prelude to this game for id. And I think though when you play it now, you see a lot of sort of unfocused level design and simple and kind of if you were to assess it now, it'd be unfairly simple. But to be honest, like it was also trailblazing, and it was also taking, like we talked a lot about BSP this episode, and even about maps in general, but it was taking a lot of steps in level design, first-person level design, that really nobody was really fooling with. If you take a game that we have played for the podcast, and we talked about sort of the time comparisons with this game being Ultima Underworld, they were making an RPG, and their level design goals were much different than this game. Yeah. Not a combat-centric game. It was a lot more exploration-centric. They were, building RPG, areas for RPG purposes. And this is an action game. And so level design, first-person level design for action games was just not really understood. And I think that there's a lot of templates in here, whether they knew it or not, there's a lot of templates in here where they were trailblazing level design for this genre, which, as I've talked about on the podcast many times, is one of my favorite genres. So very important for me in that category. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, I'll stick with level design for a minute to take another point of it, because from another side, while I totally agree with all of that, it also, I think, does so much to suggest its sort of story and narrative and mood and tone through the level design alone. It's something we talked about, sort of looking at the progression, particularly on a macro level of the episodes, and how you started from stuff that felt a little bit more Wolfenstein-y in a way, and then had the definite, more Cthulhu-inflected bleeding through of worlds in the second episode, and then, in this third one being fully blown into hell, having a lot more abstraction and sort of the weird Gothic architecture and separated buildings and like lots of kind of weird stuff compared to the other one, the other two episodes. So yeah, for me, the level design thing that I particularly picked on was how the story is just told and how the thing plays. Like that, they don't really even need the text or telling you where you're progressing or anything like that. They could just do level after level and you'd get it. So, and that really just comes through in the level design. Sometimes it's also just in really good choices for texture use, not something we dwelt on a lot, but I think that does a lot of the bleed through, but also some of those weird abstract rooms that I mentioned that were kind of some of my early favorites, of like, there was just this whole area that was just very blue and just being like, how weird that was and how it felt kind of alien and science fiction-y without really a lot. I mean, there just wasn't a lot there to reinforce that. But it's there and you can feel it. You can imagine the higher res version of these worlds. They probably wouldn't make sense in higher res. So they kind of used what they had and used it really well, I thought. So,
well, we will probably experience a higher res version of this sort of world. So
we likely will. And some of us already have.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you. The sense of place in the level design, that I think I mentioned it in the first episode, but at the time, having largely Wolfenstein being, the major touchstone in first person sort of action gaming before this, the leap from that to here. And like I said, I think I told the story of the first time I saw Doom being played on a friend of mine's PC in college, was mind blowing because of the sense of place. You're like, with this, dark and scary and immersive, and for the time, and they definitely were pushing the BSPs to be more sort of realistic, if you will, as far as architecture goes of a place, than just a grid, in a castle.
Yeah, cool. So what's your second?
My second one, that actually is a good segue from your level design sort of filter or lens, is just theme in general. And obviously it may be a little bit silly to say that there's the thematic material here is that important, because it's like, you're a space marine and you're going to Mars and hell and fighting demons. But I think that it shouldn't be underestimated, the impact that, yes, id is id, especially at the time. And yes, there's sort of a sophomoric sort of feel to just the approach here, but also like the sense of going to hell and fighting demons and being a fully immersed sort of like hell on, hell on Mars or whatever, but hell on Earth feel. It got copycatted a lot. It changed sort of the tone of the industry in many ways. Video games sort of, and this is going to sound super cheesy, but video games were starting to grow up, and yes, hyper violent, and yes, it's a lot of guns and shooting and, but there's science fiction thrown in there too. And there's a maturity here that I think Doom, though, doesn't necessarily take all of the credit for that migration, because we've talked a lot about other games around the time that contributed to that progression of the industry. But this sort of like mature rated content really, it was the trailblazer in a lot of ways of that stuff. And so the thematic, though super simple and almost sort of two-dimensional, thematically, it still was another sort of trailblazer for, I think, the industry. And there was a lot of hell on Earth stuff happening after this in all genres, right? It wasn't just shooters. It was just like, oh yeah, okay, we can do, of course, before this, we always, from time to time, we bring up D&D, and so that's really your sort of like the rawest form of dealing with those other similar themes, not necessarily hell, like Christian hell, but the themes of demons and dragons and things. But for video games, Doom was really one of the tips of the spear for this. So
yeah, and they were so unapologetic about it.
Yeah, right.
It sort of reminds me of, although I think he's taken this too far at times, it reminds me of the way Tarantino is with his critics, of just like, no, this is just what we do. You can have this, and it's maybe a thing that we didn't credit GTA 3 with enough, as how it was just kind of, no, this is just what we are. And one of the things we can be, and tough, you don't like it, sorry. Something we talked too much. You and I didn't particularly like that, but yeah, I mean, so what? Is a part of the response to that. It doesn't have to be one thing, and it doesn't have to be safe for everyone. So I think that they are kind of just unapologetic about that. Like, no, it's simple and fast. It's not, I don't know. It's like the Ramones or something. It's not a lot to it necessarily, although I think it's there's a lot more to it than you would probably think, as we've discussed over the 3 episodes. I think it's just kind of like brash and in your face about it. This is just what we are. So.
Yeah, and I mean, the name of the company is id.
Exactly.
There's and I agree with that too. The
Super Ego didn't last more than a year.
The psychology jokes.
I got you, Ryan.
The comparison to Tarantino is interesting. As a quick aside, the one I feel like my memory of their attitude toward this, and even just reading about them for, there's been a lot written about this era of id, that they didn't take themselves as seriously as he tends to, when it comes to the brashness of it. Is like, yes, they're both unapologetic, but these were almost just kids having comic book kind of fun.
I should say this is like an early Tarantino.
Fair.
Not Tarantino defending the end of, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood or something. More at the beginning. Just, unapologetic about having fun doing something over the top versus unapologetic about this is my art, and don't criticize my art kind of thing. But anyway, yes, right. It's still a good comparison for that sort of Ramones rebel sort of like, anarchy kind of feel to it. Yeah.
But yeah, it was very defining. As a quick aside to Masters of Doom specifically, which probably the audience knows about the book, it was just optioned by USA Network, by James Franco and his brother, to do a miniseries show.
Oh, interesting.
About taking the Masters of Doom book and making a show out of it. So we'll see if that comes to see the light of day, but interesting synergy to that point. But What do you got next?
My second one was just maybe I should do the third one first. They both fit. Let's go with the propulsive play. This game is at its best when it's moving forward. And, as we've talked about, it's really kind of at its worst when you're trying to figure out what you're supposed to do. So whenever you're kind of pulling back, looking at the map, trying to figure out where you haven't been, and or even just trying to work out some puzzle and remember the 5 different places you got to go and what order, that's when it's not really shining. It's really shining when you are racing into a room full of monsters, the door closes behind you, and you can't go back. It's because you just can't dare turn around because they'll rip you to shreds while you wait for the door to open. That's when it's at its best, is when you're just, okay, I'm in it now. I got to deal with this, and I got to deal with what's in front of me. And then beyond that, I'll have to do it again and again and again. I think the first few levels in this section were some of my favorite of the cast, just because I had so little ammo. And I was having to really run through and find whatever I could and use all the tools available to me. It didn't take long before I was overpowered again, and I kind of had everything. And it almost made me want to go back through the levels and just immediately get myself killed so I could see if I could beat it with just the tools that were available in the level. Because all of them are supposed to be able to be played that way. And I think that actually is some of the strongest that the game can be. So, I love the speed of the thing, and it really changed how we felt about games to see something that moved this quickly. So,
yeah, it's a good one. Yeah, I wish I'd thought of that one. That was a really important one. My final one is an obvious one, I think, as well, that we did dabble with, but I think technology is important to mention. And it's something that Carmack, is known for, of course, specifically, though, lots of people contributed to the programming efforts, but, he's the, I don't know what, Howard Hughes, I don't know what a good analogy is. But,
wow.
He's kind of eccentric in lots of ways too.
That's true.
But,
yeah, that's true.
But he, just without talking about him specifically, just the technology that it was bringing to the table with this engine. And of course, Epic eventually comes along and starts really challenging them in various other ways with tools and things. But it was really, again, another trailblazer when it comes to pushing the boundaries and thinking of different ways to do things. And really with each of their games from here on out, for the most part, while that core group was still there, each game was taking a new leap forward for technology, especially 3D rendering for the game. And we won't ever get to talk about Doom 3, but they were doing interesting things with shaders there and lighting and things that no one else had been doing, right? And they were always the ones saying, well, what if we were to go to try to do this,
Right.
When a lot of other,
even to Tech 5 or 6 or whatever the most recent version is, where they're doing these mega texture things, where they're constantly streaming in texture. Like, it's always been a big part of their company to be a technology company.
Yeah. So that was my last one.
Okay. I think my other one is a design one, and I didn't know which order to put this in, because this could have fit in the last bit of conversation as well, and that is the emergent mixes of enemies. We've talked a lot about how you can play them off of one another, but also just you have to constantly manage space and distance with them based on what weapons they have, the instant hits that don't do a ton of damage at distance with the shotgun versus the pistol guy. Okay, he's not doing a ton of different damage necessarily, but can hit you from anywhere. I guess it's consistent damage no matter what distance he's at, et cetera, et cetera. And then you've got the imps and cacodemons being able to move, and then you've got the in-your-face pinkies, and then, of course, the truly terrifying stuff that is really big and scary, or can cover a distance in a short time and then really be in your face, like the Lost Souls. I mean, there's just such an important mix of characteristics, and a lot of it very archetypal. A lot of this stuff really kind of sets the groundwork for how enemies work. I mean, certainly something we talked about for Republic Commando. I know it's a big part of how Halo worked.
Mm-hmm.
Although in those cases it's a little different. Console games, a little bit slower paced, etc. But a lot of the sort of enemy emergent stuff starts here, or at least is well shown off here.
Mm-hmm.
And none of it's super complicated, and that's kind of one of the interesting things. I think part of emergent enemy design that has to be the fact that it's individually fairly predictable. That the complexity comes from the mixes, and I think you definitely see that here.
Yeah.
They also deploy a lot of techniques to just make it to give them simple tools to make gameplay. So enemies don't wake up until X. They hear you, or they see you, right? Line of sight, you're in front of them somewhere. And maybe some occasional triggers, and then lots of monster closets and things. It's like, okay, now you've gotten to the back of that room, you got the key, and you turn around and, oh, look at that, everybody's here for the party. And now you've got that propulsive play again, but through this weird mix of enemies that you haven't quite seen before. I love that. I mean, you're still seeing the first enemy types at the end of the game. You're still seeing the imps and the dead humans up to the last few levels. Part of that is they don't have tons of enemies, but a large part of that is they don't need them. You don't need a lot of complicated progression necessarily of how your enemies are going to be when you have this mix that works really well. So
enemy design, level design, mixing all together with weapon design, and that emergence. And there's a good talk. It's been a long time since I saw it. I was there for it live, but you probably mentioned it in the show notes. Randy Smith has a good talk on orthogonal enemy design back at GDC many years ago.
I will hunt it down and put it in the show notes again. But I feel like we've mentioned it, but
maybe we have. Yeah, okay. Randy Smith, of course, was on the podcast as a guest for Thief. So I mean, it's a proven good way to go about things. And as Brett said, having simple rules for each enemy is really key for that. And Bungie's been really good at that over the years, for sure. And then the other thing that I'd mention with that is the enemies in this game specifically teach you a lot about what your capabilities are too, in many ways, because the humanoid enemies are firing things at you that you can fire back. And then the plasma rifle is very similar to the projectiles that some of the other enemies have. And then I think the Baron shoots rockets, right? Or does the Cyberdemon shoots rockets?
So the Cyberdemon has chain guns. Oh, no.
Guns.
The Spider Demon has
chain
guns.
Guns.
Cyberdemon in Doom 2 has rockets. Here, the Baron throws a similar projectile to the to the imps and stuff, but it does a lot more damage. So, and
then of course the pinkies are doing, coming up and doing melee damage or, CQC damage. And so there's a lot of good correlations there that's all really mixed together well. But it's a really excellent point that you see the early enemies throughout the whole game. And that's just the mixing and matching, numbers. Yep. They get pretty high in numbers in some cases, which makes it really exciting too.
Yeah, and it's interesting too. I mean, one of the things I didn't realize is that with the difficulty level, it just makes some of the enemies different. That's really cool. That's really neat. I didn't know that, because it was a conversation we've had to have between us, a number of times over the years about how to do difficulty for a game we're working on. And we've always taken this sort of just scale the damage approach, scale the damage you take or the damage you do, to make it one experience that you have to balance. And here they're definitely doing something different. I was really surprised to learn that tonight from you. So also kind of interesting. It's another thing too, where your enemies can just work wherever. That's another thing that's kind of great. You just drop your enemy in and it just does what it does. It just runs at you and starts shooting or whatever, right? It's got very simple pathing and very simple decision trees. Basically no decision tree. Where's the player? Get him is pretty much the what damaged me. If nothing damaged me, then assume the player is my enemy. It's pretty much the game. So the AI is really simple and can handle all the environments. So yeah, it's pretty nice to be able to just drop in. Oh, we'll just put in a Cacodemon instead of a Baron because we can. Because they basically move the same way. Yeah, it just works.
Yeah, that's very much Bungie's approach too. Yep, for sure.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
I believe they also scale difficulty and shift around enemy makeups based on difficulty as well. It's not just.
Oh, yeah, that's cool.
Yeah,
that's cool. Yeah, that's unusual because of the complexity. I mean, we did some of that at Bethesda, but that was more to allow the game to scale with you depending on where you wanted to go. So it's more of an open world design decision rather than a space and, mix decision. So
right.
There's a lot of different ways to skin that particular cat. But
Cacodemon.
All right. What's that?
Skin that Cacodemon.
Skin that Cacodemon.
There you go.
We did it. Skin that Calico Demon.
Oh, nice.
Yep. Thank you.
We could go all night.
We probably shouldn't.
Nope.
No, but we're going to call it there. You want to, before we do the outro, you want to tell people what we're going to do next week?
Yeah, our first bonus episode that we are planning is actually to ultimately play Sigil, which is technically the unofficially the fifth episode to Doom that John Romero has done on his own in his spare time. For free. It's another WAD that adds on to the game. I haven't read up much on it, so I don't know how it does that exactly. So I'm excited to see. I will probably also play the fourth episode that was added to Ultimate Doom. Is that what the lineage
yes.
is?
Yeah,
there?
Ultimate Doom added the fourth.
So
I probably will.
4 and 5 if I get. I should have the time. So yeah, we're gonna play Sigil, and then we really will have played all of Doom, the original Doom, because that's actually the cool thing about that, and a little bit of motivation for playing Doom right now. Though Doom Eternal is imminent as well, is that John did just release that, and it's the anniversary, of course. So it's interesting that it's fun to play this on the anniversary when he's releasing that as an anniversary, and it's free, and so it's kind of on everyone's mind.
Yeah, I assume you'll be downloading for the PC.
I assume I will have to do that.
Yeah. I know it does work with Steam versions. I looked that up before to make sure that was true.
Okay.
And it should work with Steam versions. So it should not be a big deal. We did, as I mentioned, decide to put off feedback because we knew we would be going into takeaways, and our first segment went a little longer than expected. So we will start catching up with that probably over the next couple of weeks. I guess I could just mention, we look for reviews on the podcast app, the Apple infrastructure. It helps us reach new listeners. And of course, if you send one in and tell me what song it's set to, I will do a singing review of your parody lyrics of your favorite or most challenging lyrical song. You do what you want to do. You do you.
Boy.
And Tim will sit through it. That's his promise to you. You can also send us email at devgameclub@gmail.com. You can, of course, find the podcast on Twitter at devgameclub. We can also find my co-host at
Tim Longo Jr. with the JR at the end.
And, of course, you can find the show notes at devgameclub.com. I've been streaming weeknights. Lately, I'm playing Horizon Zero Dawn on the PS4, kind of the most recent thing I've played. It's been a while since I played something relatively recent for the stream. I do that weeknights, and on the weekends, I try to catch up with whatever we're playing for the cast. So you might be able to catch me playing some Sigil over the weekend. I guess that's going to do it for us tonight. Have fun playing games this week, and good night.
Good night.